With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halverson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. I am broadcasting from Kansas City, Missouri, where I am at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting's annual convention. Joining me at my booth to start off the day is Dan Halstrom. He is the president and CEO of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Thank you for taking a few minutes to speak with me after your panel here. You just spoke at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting annual convention. Yep. And I wanted to talk with you about a couple of other things, that you discussed during the panel. But I want to start out with the elections. So we've just had elections here in the U.S., a couple of our important trading partners also having elections. But starting out, looking at trade policies for the last 4 years have not been what agriculture has been wanting. What do you expect for the next 4 years?
Well, yeah, I think we're hopeful that maybe we can get a little more engagement with some new agreements, possibly. And of course, the most important thing is to defend our current agreements. You know, I look at our business, and you've got USMCA with Mexico and Canada, very, very important, our number one trading bloc in the world for beef and pork. You look at CAFTA. Central America, extremely important. I would argue CAFTA is probably the fastest growing region. It's not the biggest, but fastest growing region for both beef and pork. And so I think, then you have the China Phase 1 that was started with Trump Administration 1, and you also look at the Japan-U.S. Ag Agreement that was started with them. So I think defending and maintaining what we have is also very important, because this is what leads to our record business that we've had the last few years, and we want to maintain that.
Right. Mexico also just had an election, and with them bringing in a new administration as well, Mexico being a very important trading partner for our U.S. meat, what can we expect with that? Or is there a lot of unknowns still?
I think there's a lot of unknowns. Claudia Sheinbaum, the Sheinbaum administration took over October 1, so they're still in the honeymoon phase. But I think our intel from our contacts and our offices down there in Mexico would indicate that there's a real optimism that the USMCA, that the relationship and the history will override some of these bumps in the road that we have. One being the GMO corn issue, of course. Right. And I think it's just too important, not only for the U.S. but for the Mexico side as well, both to their ag economy and their economies in general. So, yeah, it's going to be a little bumpy. Not denying that, as it is anytime you have a new administration in any key trading partner country. And you mentioned it, we have a lot.
Right.
We have Japan just went through an election and has a relatively new prime minister, and that's our number 2 trading partner, so behind Mexico. So yeah, and there's a lot of uncertainty, but in the end, I think the history with the relationships should override that.
What about building new markets? What's the focus for that?
Yeah, the amount of potential is amazing. And I mentioned CAFTA, Central America, right. A market like Guatemala sounds small, but they're turning into a reliable 52-week-a-year buyer of U.S. beef and pork. And with the more Guatemalas you can have, the better, right? So Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, huge opportunities. Indonesia for both beef and pork, and Malaysia for pork. So Africa is another region, West Africa in particular, Central Africa, places like Angola. It's just amazing when you look at what's going on there with the emerging middle class, the potential for our ag products.
Right. What about Africa? You talked a little bit about Africa in the panel, and what is there a chance for good markets there?
Yeah, without a doubt, there's a chance. Now, we don't have real. It's pretty. The market access is sketchy. Mm-hmm. Depending on the country. Your largest economy in Africa is Nigeria, and the largest population base, and they basically have no market access for any imports of anything.
Right.
But products getting there, it goes through other channels, so they'll legitimize the process. This is all part of an emerging region of the world. And when they do legitimize it and realize that doing it the right way versus the indirect way is more cost effective and more beneficial, It'll take time, but it'll get done. So these are things from a market access standpoint that are ongoing. It's high on the list for the pork industry and the beef industry. And I'm looking forward to see it develop. Now, the flip side of that is from a marketing standpoint and a market development standpoint, we're already active in the Africa region. These USDA funds that we talked about in a panel, the incremental funding is exactly for this type of thing, to go into newer regions, less developed regions, spend some money, invest in the future, because the return today will be minimal, but that's how these markets start.
Right. You talked also about something in the panel that I wanted to talk to you about, and that was shipping chilled meat versus frozen. What's the advantage there?
Yeah, yeah. The way most of these markets start is it's frozen. There's the supply chains get established, and they're not the most efficient, right? But as the markets develop, and I'll use the example of Japan, Korea, Mexico, of course, Canada, a large percentage of the product is shipped chilled, not frozen. So in other words, you'll maintain a container going to Japan at 0 degrees centigrade or +1, just slightly over freezing. It maintains the integrity of the product without freezing it. And our technology is so good that the shelf life, in a case of beef, could last up to 90 or 100 days.
Oh, wow.
And the transit time is only 20 to 25 days.
Right.
So you have 70 plus days of shelf life to distribute it chilled. Well, this is the cornerstone of most of the high value premium programs. Chilled, prime or chilled upper 2/3 choice, whatever it might be, and this is the part of the business that's booming. Mm-hmm. And the advantage of that is that number one is the quality's better. You don't freeze something and thaw. Anytime you do that, you have less moisture, a little less tender.
Right.
That's the quality advantage. But the economic advantage is that this forces buyers to buy 52 weeks of the year. They have to buy every week, so it's delivering every week chilled. So it kind of takes the economic component out of it. The number one thing I'm telling buyers, and our team is telling buyers, is the market going up or down? We have no idea. But if you buy every week of the year, you're going to get the downs and the ups. So you're going to buy when the price is right, and you're always going to be in the market. No one's smart enough to outdo the market consistently.
Right.
So this is really the advantage. It's 52-week-a-year business.
Right. And I can see that would be a great advantage.
Exactly. It's an advantage for the supply chain as well, because they know that this demand's coming every week.
Right.
So they can build it in.
Right. Well, looking as we finish up 2024, how are exports looking for this year? Are we finishing on a strong note?
Yeah, on the pork side, we will set a record on volume and value, all-time record. We're going to be very close to $8.6 billion on pork exports globally. And on the beef side, more than likely, we're going to end up with our second largest year ever, behind 2022. In the neighborhood of $10.5 billion. So we're going to be $19+ billion in sales globally, and that's exciting. But it's the future that's even more exciting, because you look at all these regions that are developing that don't have enough. They don't understand about U.S. red meat protein. And once they do, they get really excited about it.
All right. Well, that sounds like a good note to wrap things up on. I always like ending on a positive note when we can. Speaking with Dan Halstrom, the President and CEO, of the U.S. Meat Export Federation. I'm Sabrina Halverson. This is the AgNet News Hour. We are broadcasting from the National Association of Farm Broadcasting's annual convention in Kansas City. We'll be back right after this. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. For the Conservationist of the Year, what goals would you like to see occur this year?
So this is continuing work as the Certified Crop Advisor Conservationist of the Year. They're looking for certified crop advisors who are trying to aid farmers in getting information or conservation practices. One thing we've identified that is keeping farmers from getting conservation practices is actually just information and products. The current federal regulations actually were written in the 1950s. And at that time, those rules were only restricting fertilizers and pesticides. They didn't put into account other developing technologies such as plant biostimulants and some of these newer technologies we're using in agriculture. And so for 2024, our goal is to really help change the laws that are impacting biostimulant regulation to allow them to be used and treated as a fertilizer, not as a pesticide.
So, what does that process look like to go through that and get that change to be where it needs to be?
Well, actually, there's a very long on-ramp. We've been working on this since 2014, and the bricks that we've laid on this path are now hopefully being included in the Farm Bill. So more than anything now, it's just supporting the work we've already done, trying to get legislators aware of the problem and hopefully enact those rules. There's an act right now by California regulators that's called the Plant Biostimulant Act. And so the best thing that farmers can do is call up and say, hey, we support this language. This is going to give us more tools to enact those conservation practices and have more products available to us.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Checking in with the ag news of the day, starting off with Rod Bain.
We recently announced $33.5 million in funding for 113 grant projects that are really designed to expand and explore new market opportunities for local and regional food businesses.
Agriculture Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs Jenny Moffitt saying the funding is distributed through a trio of offerings through the Agricultural Marketing Service.
The Farmers Market Promotion Program, the Local Food Promotion Program, and then the Regional Food System Partnership Program. These three, as well as the Value Added Producer Grant Program that is under the Rural Development Scope, all fold into and make up the Local Agriculture Market Program.
She adds each program varies in focus, yet the overarching theme is building up local and regional food systems while increasing availability of locally grown agricultural products. As illustration of each AMS program, the Undersecretary provides an awarded project within each offering. First,
examples of the Farmers Market and Promotion Program and the Local Food Promotion Program. One is an example out in the city of Torrance in California. They received a Farmers Market Promotion Program grant to improve the accessibility of Torrance Farmers Market. They're doing that through a distribution program for senior citizens who have mobility and other obstacles that prevent them from navigating the market. Can now instead, through this program, will have the opportunity to receive pre-box assorted fresh produce packages at distribution sites.
A second example through the Local Food Promotion Program.
Chop Local in Wayland, Iowa received a local food promotion program to increase local and regional meat sales by establishing an online farmers market to improve their marketing efforts. They're expecting that because of this new online sales opportunity that they will have through this grant, they'll be able to increase the sales of participating producers by 25% year over year.
Meanwhile, within the Regional Food System Partnerships Program,
this grant program is really about bringing together different organizations to facilitate and expand more new and better markets for regional food producers in the area. A highlight that we had this year for one of the grant recipients is the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition, located in Charleston, West Virginia. They received a Regional Food System Partnership grant that's going to unite food and ag businesses, nonprofits, charitable food organizations, and universities to improve aggregation and distribution, a really critical need for small-scale value-added producers in West Virginia.
I'm Rod Bain reporting.
In the 80s and early 90s, Russia, in order to feed its people, had to buy huge amounts of U.S. grain, particularly wheat. But since then,
Russia has emerged over the past few decades to be the dominant global supplier of wheat.
A quarter of all the wheat that's bought and sold around the world comes from Russia. This from USDA Outlook Chairman Mark Jekanowski. In fact, Russia's prolific wheat production and exports have made global wheat supplies abundant and may be one reason for U.S. wheat acreage steadily declining over the past 50 years. Mark says farmers in Russia and other nations
have expanded production, have developed more of a competitive advantage in wheat, where our competitive advantage has, really emerged more in corn and soybeans and other crops.
Over the last few months, Russia's wheat exports have soared to record high levels. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
Welcome back. We are here in Kansas City at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Annual Convention. All right, well, to get us on the record, would you please give me your name and title?
I am Rod Snyder. I'm a former ag advisor to the EPA administrator.
Great. Thank you for taking some time to come to my booth here in the Broadcast Center. We are speaking at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting's annual convention in Kansas City, Missouri. And you were just on a panel discussing some of the environmental things that are going on. And so I wanted to just kind of introduce some of the things that you talked about to my listeners, and wanted to start off with just kind of giving your impression of things. And we've just had this election. We know that Donald Trump will be coming back into office now. After the 3 years that you spent working for the current administration in the EPA, do you think that we should be bracing for a lot of changes?
Well, certainly the incoming Trump administration has a different set of priorities and governing approach when it comes to environmental regulations. They've committed to reducing regulations. You also can look back at his first term in terms of the way that the agency behaved at that time as sort of a predictor for what might happen moving forward. I think when you start to get into the details of that, it becomes a lot more complicated. And what I said on the panel is that agencies do not operate in a vacuum. And a lot of the issues that I dealt with in the last 4 years at EPA were often driven by court decisions or court cases. And sometimes judges had a lot to say about environmental issues that impact farmers. And so the agency still has to navigate those things. And the Trump administration will need to do the same.
You know, and I wanted to ask you about that, the court decisions versus government control of things, especially with dealing with EPA type of issues. There are a lot of court cases that will dictate what happens, right?
That's right. And it, on a whole range of issues, a lot of environmental policy does get litigated from one direction or the other. One of the prime examples is around pesticide policy and pesticide registrations. The Endangered Species Act has been a really complicating factor for pesticide registrations for many, many years now, meaning that courts have said that the agency needs to consider impacts to listed species when they review and approve crop protection products. That is not a discretionary activity for EPA. It is all federal courts have said that the agency must deal with that. So it's oversimplified to say that the Trump administration can simply pull back or walk away from working on the Endangered Species Act. It's a situation in which courts have directed the agency. Now it's just a question of what does that framework look like going forward. The specifics of that, to me, it's not a black and white of should the agency work on endangered species or not. It's what form will that take?
Right, and that can take several different forms, especially when we don't know exactly who's going to be coming into the administration in different roles. One name that has been thrown around is RFK Jr. and that could go a lot of different ways. But if he were to have a role in the administration, how do you see that going?
Well, it's unclear exactly what role RFK Jr. will play in the next Trump administration, but we know he is a trusted advisor to the president, and particularly when it comes to things like food and ag and environmental and health issues. The reason why I have raised some concern about that is that RFK Jr., in my mind, has not always taken sound science-based positions when it comes to a host of issues, whether that's vaccines, whether that's crop protection tools, whether that's biotech or GMOs. We have a regulatory system that is based on sound science, and agencies need to adhere to that. And I just have raised some concerns about RFK Jr.'s past comments. For example, let's take glyphosate, which is the most commonly used herbicide in the country. He has said clearly that he thinks glyphosate should be banned. Well, there's an entire risk assessment process that EPA and the federal government goes through to determine what's safe and what's not. And it is not up to political appointees to upend that process. And I just hope that under the next administration that they're respectful of the science.
So would it be difficult for somebody to upend that process, as you were saying, because there is a process in place. There's a system in place. If somebody were to come in and say, no, I just don't like this chemical, I don't think we should be using it, how hard would it be for somebody in the administration to skip that process?
Political appointees have a broad range of authority and power to make ultimate decisions. So they can either listen to the staff scientists or not. I'm not predicting. I have no idea the way this is going to go. All I'm saying is a word of caution that I hope that the next administration is deferential to the scientists and considers this around final decisions.
There was something else that was mentioned during the panel that I wanted to highlight, and it wasn't you who said it. It was another panel member who said that she really believes in the importance of EPA to agriculture. And I thought that that was such an interesting statement because I know just as an ag reporter myself, I'm often reporting about clashes between the EPA and agriculture. But she had a very interesting take that it is important that the EPA continues to work with and for farmers as well. Can you elaborate on that? I know that it wasn't you specifically who said it, but you agreed.
I do agree. It's well understood that there has often been a tense relationship historically between EPA and the agriculture sector, in part because EPA is a regulatory agency, and a lot of the statutes that Congress has directed EPA to implement create some tensions out in the countryside. But the other piece of the conversation that's often missed is that EPA is responsible for reviewing and approving all of those tools, those crop protection products, many of the new sort of genetic engineering innovations and things that underpin the future of U.S. agriculture and our ability to produce crops today as well. If that framework is upended, or if perhaps it's we drastically cut budgets and the agency can't do its job, that directly affects the competitiveness of American agriculture. We have got to make sure that the pipeline of innovation remains full, and that new tools and technologies come to market, hopefully here in the United States first, before other parts of the world, but that requires a functioning federal regulatory process at EPA.
We've also heard Donald Trump has said, and he did in his first administration, made a lot of changes to regulations. And he's promising to do that again, make changes to regulations. As you pointed out, political appointed people, they do have a lot of power. Of course, the president has a lot of power. Do you think that, whether good or bad, either way, do you think that we should be expecting to see a lot of changes right out of the gate?
Time will tell. I think it's a question of what are the kinds of regulations that the next Trump administration wants to either cut or do away with. I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that they were that specific during the campaign.
Right.
But also keep in mind, when you think about regulations, one of the things that EPA is responsible for is the renewable fuel standard. EPA sets all of the volumes for how much biofuel has to be blended into the nation's fuel supply. That's a regulation. So if we're going to, let's say, back away from some of those commitments, that actually has a direct impact on commodity markets, on where, for example, corn or soy or other feedstocks are going. I would just say cutting regulation can cut both ways.
Right.
And so one of the things that I think the ag sector is going to have to really focus on is making sure that the next administration remains committed to those markets domestically, particularly if trade is disrupted and we have retaliatory tariffs, or some of those foreign markets go away for things like corn and soy. Where is that going to go? Well, part of the answer could be renewable fuels, but we also have to make sure we have a robust RFS that's being implemented by EPA. So, cutting regulation, it's sort of a nuanced thing. What does that look like? What does that mean?
Right. And like you said, when you cut, it cuts both ways.
It can cut both ways. It depends on the issue. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In California, we're known for being a heavily regulated state, state-wise, not necessarily federal, same federal as every place else, but state-wise, we do have a lot of regulations, and it's such an interesting state because part of the state is suffering from having so many regulations, whereas another part of the state is extremely concerned with environmental issues and wants to see that be at the forefront. So we kind of already walk this tightrope kind of balance. I think that with looking forward, and I've kind of asked this to you 3 times in different wording, but I'm just going to ask it again. But looking forward as we wrap up here, what do you think that we can expect over the next, I would say over the next few months, but after the first few months of the year?
Well, one of the One of the issues that is near and dear to me, and that I hope that someday we can find some bipartisan consensus around, is this notion of the bioeconomy or the low-carbon economy, the ability for farmers and ranchers and landowners to contribute solutions to climate change, to greenhouse gas reduction. We've seen such incredible examples over the last several years of investments from the federal government and from the private sector going to farmers to help support practices that reduce emissions and also increase the bottom line for farmers. Those win-win solutions. I hope that going forward that we can find ways to help to continue to support those kinds of initiatives. I'm a little concerned that President-elect Trump wants to, again, pull out of the Paris Climate Accord and kind of back away from American leadership on these issues. I hope that we can find folks that want to stay at the table, work together, because farmers have a real opportunity under the low-carbon economy to win, to not only help deliver environmental results, but also to benefit economically, and that's something that I hope we can all work together on.
Yeah. Thank you for coming by. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. We are reporting from the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Annual Convention. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. For the Conservationist of the Year, what goals would you like to see occur this year?
So this is continuing work as the Certified Crop Advisor Conservationist of the Year. They're looking for certified crop advisors who are trying to aid farmers in getting information or conservation practices. One thing we've identified that is keeping farmers from getting conservation practices is actually just information and products. The current federal regulations actually were written in the 1950s. And at that time, those rules were only restricting fertilizers and pesticides. They didn't put into account other developing technologies such as plant biostimulants and some of these newer technologies we're using in agriculture. And so for 2024, our goal is to really help change the laws that are impacting biostimulant regulation to allow them to be used and treated as a fertilizer, not as a pesticide.
So what does that process look like to go through that and get that change to be where it needs to be?
Well, actually, there's a very long on-ramp. We've been working on this since 2014, and the bricks that we've laid on this path are now hopefully being included in the Farm Bill. So more than anything now, it's just supporting the work we've already done, trying to get legislators aware of the problem and hopefully enact those rules. There's an act right now by California regulators. It's called the Plant Biostimulant Act. And so the best thing that farmers can do is call up and say, hey, we support this language. This is going to give us more tools to enact those conservation practices and have more products available to us.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
Welcome back. We are here in Kansas City at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Annual Convention. And joining me now is Shauna Morris. Well, to start us off and get us on the record, would you please give me your name and title?
Sure. I'm Shauna Morris, and I'm the Executive Vice President for Trade Policy and Global Affairs with the National Milk Producers Federation and U.S. Dairy Export Council.
All right. Well, we wanted to talk about exports today for dairy. My show broadcasts primarily in California, a strong dairy state, so we're always interested in dairy topics.
Yeah, of course.
I'd like to just start off with looking at how things are going right now for dairy.
Going pretty well. We're just off our annual meeting a couple weeks ago. The vibe in the room was very positive. It's been a pretty good year for our farmers, milk price-wise. And on the export side of things, also quite positive. We actually just came off of our best quarter, this third quarter of this year, in almost 2 years. Exports haven't been this high since the very end of 2022, a real record year for us. Mm-hmm. And we look pretty strongly positioned as we head into the end of the year on the export front too.
All right, so who are some of our strongest trading partners at this time?
So our biggest trading partners are Mexico, far and away. They account for about a quarter of our exports year in, year out. They're absolutely indispensable. After that, Canada, with a little bit more complex trading relationship, and then China. An area that's become increasingly important as a region, though, I'd say, is Southeast Asia, particularly as China's been retrenching a bit, as they've had more milk production domestically and some more dairy product production domestically and withdrawn a bit from global markets. Southeast Asia is a major dairy importing region, particularly for dairy ingredients. So that's been increasingly important, with Latin America also growing as well.
So that's really interesting to see Southeast Asia becoming a bigger trading partner for the U.S. What are some of the key things to focus on when looking at a trading partner like that?
Well, that it's when you're talking about Southeast Asia compared to the others I just mentioned, then you're a region, not an individual country.
Right.
So making sure that you're tailoring your approaches country by country for the local needs of that particular population. And of course, again, when you're talking about a few countries at once, then you're talking about a handful of different policy and regulatory environments. So crafting approaches that work with each of those trading partners based on the unique dynamics in their markets. Overall, though, a common driving factor has really been the increased demand for protein, for dairy protein in particular, as those economies have grown, and we expect that to continue looking ahead as well.
So how complicated is it then to be looking at a region like that, where, like you said, they have different nuances in the different parts of the region?
Yeah, I'd say some countries make it more complicated than others.
Okay.
They are all valued trading partners.
Sure.
But certainly it's a lot easier to do business in somewhere that's a very strong U.S. ally, really dependable, straight shooter on trade like the Philippines, than it can be in some other markets in the region. And tariff differentials as well. Thailand, for instance, has quite high dairy tariffs for a number of products, so it makes it a lot more challenging to get certain of our exports into that market. Again, compared to Singapore or Philippines or even Malaysia, where tariffs are at much more modest levels.
Right. So what are some of the things that, that are really affecting the dairy industry as far as trade goes right now?
Certainly, one of the key factors affecting us is the trend I mentioned earlier with China pulling back a bit from global markets. China accounts for such a huge amount of total global dairy imports, our third largest market, but globally the most important importer of dairy products from everyone. And the fact that they've withdrawn a bit from purchasing in the last year or so as they've increased domestic production has definitely had an impact. Happily, at the same time, we've seen some counteracting of that. So that growth in Southeast Asia, in Latin America that I was mentioning has been helping to counterbalance the retrenchment on the China side and keep those export markets at the relatively stable levels that we've seen this year.
So I want to ask you, with the election and the change in the administration, we know a little bit because we've already had, a President Trump administration, so we kind of have an idea about his take on trade. Do you expect that we'll see changes coming that could, help or hinder with some of the directions that we've had for dairy trade?
Yeah. Well, it's speculating, right?
Right, and right.
Who knows what Trump 2.0 is? We have seen 1.0, and maybe the movie will run quite similar. I think we're going to see both. I think we're going to see both challenges and opportunities because that is what we saw the first time around.
Right.
So it definitely was a bumpy road, very tension-filled, pain along the way for sure. We were on the retaliation list, still are, from the Chinese side. Mm-hmm. But we also saw advancements on market access. With China on a lot of non-tariff barrier issues, with Japan on tariffs that have helped keep us on par with competitors in that market, and of course a little bit more mixed bag, but still a step in the right direction with USMCA. So I think we're looking at it as where can we identify key opportunities for access increasing, then try to work with the administration on those areas, recognizing that it's going to be a much bigger picture that they're also trying to balance at the same time.
Right. Overall, it is going to be interesting to see how everything kind of works out.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So as we wrap up here, how do you see dairy trade going for the rest of the year?
Looking pretty good. Markets are looking pretty strong on the export front heading into the close of the year. Right now, we're just, especially with that last strong quarter that I mentioned in this year, we're relatively on par with last year. We're certainly expecting that to likely maintain, if not finish out a little bit ahead of last year in terms of our exports. And then probably looking at a relatively consistent pace as we look into 2025 too, at least if you're talking about the commercial things.
Right.
Now on the policy landscape, all the wild cards that might come from that,
who knows?
Who knows how that changes things. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halverson. We are reporting from the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Annual Convention. We'll be back in just a moment. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. For the Conservationist of the Year, what goals would you like to see occur this year?
So this is continuing work as the Certified Crop Advisor Conservationist of the Year. They're looking for certified crop advisors who are trying to aid farmers in getting information or conservation practices. One thing we've identified that is keeping farmers from getting conservation practices is actually just information and products. The current federal regulations actually were written in the 1950s. And at that time, those rules were only restricting fertilizers and pesticides. They didn't put into account other developing technologies such as plant biostimulants and some of these newer technologies we're using in agriculture. And so for 2024, our goal is to really help change the laws that are impacting biostimulant regulation to allow them to be used and treated as a fertilizer, not as a pesticide.
So what does that process look like to go through that and get that change to be where it needs to be?
Well, actually, there's a very long on-ramp. We've been working on this since 2014, and the bricks that we've laid on this path are now hopefully being included in the Farm Bill. So more than anything now, it's just supporting the work we've already done, trying to get legislators aware of the problem and hopefully enact those rules. There's an act right now by California regulators. It's called the Plant Biostimulant Act. And so the best thing that farmers can do is call up and say, hey, we support this language. This is going to give us more tools to enact those conservation practices and have more products available to us.
To get to know more about Live Earth Products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halverson.
For our last segment today, this year's United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP, includes a day focused solely on agriculture as a key piece of the climate mitigation puzzle. Now, just 15 years ago, farms and forests as climate solutions were afterthoughts at COP. Rod Bain looks at the growing interest in ag's multiple benefits in this climate space in this edition of Agriculture USA.
The world again gathers to discuss both climate challenges.
Quite a robust discussion taking place by the parties around how agriculture needs help adapting to these changing climatic conditions, food insecurity, nutrition challenges that climate change is creating for farmers and the public around the world,
and potential climate solutions.
What you have is the potential for several 100 million acres of land in the United States being climate friendly and climate smart, which is a good story to tell.
At the annual United Nations Climate Change Conference, I'm Rod Bain. Ernie Shea from Solutions from the Land and Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack join us as we discuss farming and forestry's growing participation at COP29 and in climate mitigation efforts in this edition of Agriculture USA. The 29th edition of the United Nations Climate Change Conference is now underway through November 22nd. COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan includes a multitude of global representation from the agriculture sector. That is a far cry from COP15 in 2009, the first ever conference attended by Ernie Shea from Solutions from the Land.
I remember that very well because Secretary Vilsack was there and we were both lamenting that agriculture wasn't even on the agenda hardly. We were convening off-site at a university talking about agriculture as a solution, yet the negotiators didn't even have agriculture on the agenda.
Now for the second consecutive year, Shea, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, and several from the United States delegation will celebrate a food, agriculture, Agriculture and Water Day at a COP.
It's November the 19th, and we'll be there with many other agricultural stakeholders sharing the good news that agriculture can deliver.
So that is going to put a spotlight on all of the entire globe in terms of its work and contributions in this space.
An opportunity for farm and forest stakeholders to explain how their industry, their livelihoods, provide a multitude of solutions related to climate concerns.
That's why we're so invested in the climate convention, because we go to share the news that farms can be the solution pathway to well over half of the global sustainable development goals.
Among the topics covered in the Ag as a Climate Solution realm at COP29, farms, ranches, orchards, and fields as a solution to the growing challenge of invasive species and threats of crop loss.
There are all types of invasive species that are being further spread by changing climatic conditions. This is not on the radar screen at the COP. So we're going to be talking about how we can deliver solutions that help the climate, but also help curb the spread of invasive species.
Secretary Vilsack, like last year at COP28, plans to express U.S. leadership regarding agriculture as a climate mitigation tool at this year's United Nations Climate Change Conference through efforts on a domestic level, such as
the Climate Smart Commodity Initiative, 14,000 farms and counting, several million acres involved and engaged, nearly 200 practices, nearly 100 commodities, recognizing that we've already potentially either reduced or had the equivalency of 400,000 metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions avoided or reduced, which is a significant step in the right direction.
Along with USDA natural resource conservation programs, Farm Bill oriented, individually focused, and collaborative efforts like the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, as well as other ingredients in climate focus, such as comprehensive wildfire mitigation and urban ag and forestry initiatives.
When you combine that with the partnership that we developed with the UAE, the Aim for Climate Initiative, now over 600 partners, $17 billion among the partners being invested in innovations, nearly 70 innovation sprints, and the migration of that effort, Aim for Climate, to the Aim for Scale initiative that the UAE is starting with the Gates Foundation, you see the opportunity for the U.S. to take international leadership.
Information sharing through the International Climate Hub also reflects U.S. agricultural and forestry contributions to climate mitigation.
So there's a lot to talk about, a lot to report, a lot of progress that's been made, and the fact is that we're going to continue to see significant investments in all of these efforts. There's a lot of activity in this space that we can be proud of.
And as Ernie Shea points out, it is public-private partnership that is crucial to the success of agriculture as a climate solution.
To demonstrate that the entire value chain is on board, because that's what is going to be required to meet these major challenges around climate change.
This has been Agriculture USA. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That's our show for today. I'm Sabrina Halverson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halverson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.